This video is created for storytelling while the real names, locations, and identifying information have been changed to protect the privacy and dignity of the individuals and families involved. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Nolan Pierce was born on September 2, 1982, in Portland, Oregon, to William and Frances Pierce, both high school history teachers. He had an older sister, Clara, who was popular and athletic, often excelling in school and sports. From an early age, Nolan struggled socially and academically, a difficulty amplified during the family's year-long stay in Spain when he was 4. At a small local elementary school, classes were conducted entirely in Spanish, and Nolan's inability to communicate fluently left him frustrated and isolated. Upon returning to Portland, Nolan enrolled in Harrison Elementary, but teachers noted his immaturity and lack of coordination. He repeated the first grade, a decision that embarrassed him and set the tone for a long-standing resentment toward authority figures. Despite some academic improvement in subsequent years, Nolan faced challenges in writing, spelling, and motor coordination. By 3rd grade, he excelled at mathematics, yet his frustration with verbal tasks made him anxious and prone to outbursts. A diagnosis of dyslexia in 4th grade explained some of his academic struggles, but Nolan's social difficulties and early behavioral problems remained. Middle school only intensified Nolan's challenges. By 7th grade, he had begun testing boundaries with increasingly risky behavior. He and a group of friends purchased bomb-making manuals online, a move dismissed by parents as juvenile curiosity. In 8th grade, Nolan was caught shoplifting from a local electronics store, and unbeknownst to his parents, he acquired a small-caliber firearm from a friend and stashed it in his bedroom. On January 3, 1997, Nolan and a friend attended a snowboarding clinic in Bend, Oregon. The two were arrested for throwing rocks at passing vehicles, one of which struck a car. Though Nolan claimed he hadn't thrown the rock, both were referred to juvenile authorities. Following the incident, Nolan's parents arranged for him to see psychologist Dr. Samuel Harding. Dr. Harding diagnosed Nolan with major depressive disorder, noting his tearfulness when discussing his strained relationship with his father. A second psychologist, Dr. Linda Cooper, agreed that Nolan showed no signs of psychosis but recommended continued monitoring for emotional instability. Despite therapy, Nolan's behavior continued to deteriorate. He received multiple suspensions in high school for assaults and throwing objects at classmates. By June 1997, his psychologist recommended antidepressants, and Nolan was prescribed fluoxetine, which temporarily improved his mood. That same summer, he began purchasing firearms without parental knowledge, including a .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle and a small hunting knife. The family, attempting to encourage responsibility, had allowed him limited access to firearms for safety lessons, but Nolan's obsession grew beyond safe boundaries. When he entered Jefferson High School in Portland, he excelled academically, yet sought out the company of a rougher crowd. He experimented with explosives and firearm practice, claiming it was a way to vent his frustration. His parents and counselors believed his behavior had improved, unaware of the dangerous path Nolan was quietly preparing. The summer before his sophomore year, he bought additional firearms, including a .22 caliber Ruger rifle and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, hiding them in his room. By fall, he had become increasingly fascinated with news coverage of school shootings nationwide. He observed incidents like the Pearl High School shooting in Mississippi and the Heath High School attack in Kentucky, expressing admiration for the planning and control demonstrated by the perpetrators. He discussed these events casually with friends, who dismissed his comments as morbid curiosity, unaware of the severity of his intentions. As spring of 1998 approached, Nolan's mood grew darker, his obsession with firearms and explosives intensifying. On May 19th, he arranged to purchase a stolen .32 caliber handgun from a local acquaintance. Early the next morning, he stashed it in his locker at Jefferson, unaware that the school had been notified about the missing weapon. By 9 a.m., police had identified Nolan as a potential threat, and he was temporarily suspended for possession of the firearm. After returning home that afternoon, Nolan was confronted by his father about the incident. William Pierce threatened to send him to a strict boarding school if his behavior did not improve. Alone in the house, Nolan's resentment reached a breaking point. He retrieved his .22 caliber rifle and over the next hour killed both of his parents in the kitchen. He staged the bodies, covering them with sheets and preparing rudimentary explosive devices as booby traps, though these devices ultimately failed to detonate. By evening, Nolan began formulating the next stage of his plan. He loaded his backpack with ammunition, rifles, a 9mm pistol, and his hunting knife. Wearing a long trench coat to conceal his weapons, he drove to Jefferson High the following morning, parking 2 blocks from the school and entering through a dirt path behind the campus. At 7:58 a.m., he began his attack in the hallways, firing a .22 caliber rifle and wounding multiple students. The chaos escalated quickly as students scrambled, some attempting to tackle him. His attack moved into the crowded cafeteria, where he fired dozens of rounds, killing 2 students and wounding over 20 others. Several students attempted to intervene, including a group who tackled him and pinned him down despite being injured. In the struggle, Nolan drew his 9mm pistol, wounding 2 more students before being subdued. By 8:04 a.m., Officer Daniel Bishop arrived and arrested Nolan. Police soon discovered the bodies of his parents at home, along with a cache of explosives, firearms, and other dangerous materials. The Pierce household had been rigged to cause further destruction, but authorities safely detonated the devices. Nolan was charged with dozens of felonies, including multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and possession of explosives. His case quickly became a media sensation, drawing national attention due to the extreme violence, premeditation, and the fact that he had targeted his own school. After his arrest, Nolan Pierce was taken into custody and placed under intense security. The following day, authorities searched the Pierce home and discovered not only the bodies of his parents, but also a stockpile of firearms, homemade explosives, and ammunition. Investigators noted that Nolan had meticulously planned both the murders at home and the school attack. His journals and notes revealed a fascination with prior school shootings and a detailed timeline of the weapons he had acquired and hidden over months. During initial interrogations, Nolan admitted to killing his parents, but was evasive regarding his intentions at Jefferson High. He showed little outward remorse, though he expressed that he had been struggling with feelings of anger and isolation. Psychologists brought in to assess him identified signs of major depressive disorder, obsessive behavior, and an emerging pattern of violent ideation. Despite these findings, he appeared highly organized and capable of understanding the consequences of his actions. The news of the attack shocked the Portland community and the nation. Parents and students were outraged and traumatized, while journalists highlighted the disturbing nature of the events and Nolan's apparent obsession with firearms and violence. Authorities faced intense scrutiny over how a student with known mental health challenges and access to weapons could carry out such a devastating attack. Nolan's trial began in early 1999. Prosecutors presented evidence detailing the premeditation of both the home murders and the school shooting, including the weapons purchases, explosive devices, and written plans he had kept. They argued that despite his young age, Nolan had knowingly and deliberately carried out a series of violent acts that put hundreds of lives at risk. The defense focused on Nolan's mental health history, emphasizing his childhood struggles with dyslexia, social isolation, and depressive episodes. They presented testimony from psychologists who suggested that early intervention might have prevented the escalation of his violent behavior. They argued that Nolan suffered from significant emotional and cognitive impairments that diminished his culpability, though he remained aware of the acts he was committing. Throughout the trial, victims' families recounted their experiences, describing the lasting trauma and fear caused by Nolan's attack. Students testified about the moments they hid, ran, or tried to stop him, painting a chilling picture of the chaos in Jefferson High's hallways and cafeteria. The prosecution emphasized the deaths of his parents and the students as evidence of the extreme danger he posed to those around him. In November 1999, Nolan Pierce pled guilty to all charges, including the murders of his parents, 2 students, and multiple counts of attempted murder. The judge, after hearing from both the prosecution and defense, sentenced him to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Nolan expressed brief remorse for his actions, but did not provide any further explanation for his motivations. The case sparked national debate over school safety, mental health intervention, and gun access for minors. Legislators and educators cited the Pierce case as a cautionary example of the consequences of inadequate supervision and early warning signs being overlooked. Schools across the country began reviewing security protocols, emergency drills, and mental health support for students exhibiting troubling behavior. Years later, Nolan sought a new trial, claiming that his original defense had been inadequate and had failed to properly pursue an insanity plea. Psychologists who reviewed his case reported that Nolan may have exhibited paranoid delusions, including conspiratorial thoughts about government and media manipulation. Courts, however, denied his appeals, reaffirming the original judgment and confirming that Nolan remained a dangerous individual who had acted with full awareness. Today, Nolan Pierce remains incarcerated at the Oregon State Correctional Institution. His case is studied in criminal justice courses and mental health programs as an example of a young perpetrator whose combination of mental illness, social isolation, and access to firearms resulted in a tragic spree of violence. The aftermath of Nolan Pierce's spree left deep scars on both the Jefferson High community and the wider Portland area. Students who survived the attack struggled with post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and fear of returning to school. Many reported recurring nightmares and a heightened sense of vulnerability, while teachers faced the challenge of supporting students while coping with their own trauma. Mental health counselors were brought in for years afterward to provide ongoing therapy, and the school implemented stricter security measures, including metal detectors, controlled entrances, and increased surveillance. In the months following the attack, the families of the victims formed support groups to cope with their grief and to advocate for changes in school safety laws. They lobbied for stricter regulations on firearms for minors, mandatory mental health screenings for at-risk youths, and more robust communication channels between schools, parents, and local authorities. The story of Nolan Pierce became a frequent reference in debates on how early warning signs of violent behavior could be identified and mitigated. Researchers and psychologists studied the Pierce case extensively, identifying a pattern of behavioral warning signs that, if noticed and addressed earlier, could potentially prevent similar tragedies. These included social withdrawal, fascination with weapons and explosives, fixation on previous violent acts, and escalating aggression. The case underscored the importance of coordinated interventions involving schools, families, and mental health professionals. Nolan's imprisonment did not end public interest in the case. Over the years, books, documentaries, and academic papers recounted the events, analyzing the psychology behind his actions and the systemic failures that allowed the tragedy to unfold. While some narratives focused on Nolan's troubled childhood and mental health struggles, others emphasized the devastating impact on the victims and their families, reminding society of the human cost of such violence. Despite multiple appeals, Nolan remained incarcerated without the possibility of parole. He reportedly spent his time reading and reflecting, though reports suggested he never fully acknowledged the depth of harm he caused. Psychologists visiting the prison continued to note signs of obsessive behavior and lingering resentment, but his structured environment limited the potential for further violence. The incident had a lasting effect on American school policy. Many states implemented stricter gun control measures for minors and required that schools have comprehensive emergency response plans. Programs aimed at identifying at-risk students, improving school climate, and promoting mental health support became more widespread. Teachers and administrators received training in threat assessment and conflict resolution, while parents were encouraged to monitor their children for signs of distress or violent tendencies. For survivors, the process of healing has been ongoing. Annual reunions of Jefferson High alumni sometimes include commemorations for the victims, serving as a way for the community to remember and honor those lost. Mental health initiatives inspired by the Pierce tragedy continue to evolve, aiming to prevent similar tragedies by addressing the complex factors that contribute to youth violence. Nolan Pierce's spree remains a chilling reminder of how a combination of access to firearms, untreated mental health issues, and social isolation can lead to devastating consequences. His story is taught in criminal justice courses, psychology classes, and law enforcement training as an example of early warning signs, the importance of intervention, and the long-lasting effects of trauma on communities. Though decades have passed since the Jefferson High shooting, the legacy of the victims and the lessons learned continue to resonate. Families, survivors, and policymakers alike use the tragedy to advocate for systemic change, ensuring that schools are safer and that signs of extreme behavioral distress are taken seriously. Nolan Pierce may remain behind bars, but the echoes of his actions continue to influence how society approaches youth violence, mental health, and school safety. The file had been gathering dust for 27 years. Detective Armand Rahman stood in the records room, flipping through brittle pages that smelled faintly of damp paper and time. The case was labeled simply Case 47-B, Unidentified Female, 1999. No name, no family, just a body found near a quiet stretch of road outside a small town that had long since moved on. Back then, the investigation had gone nowhere. No witnesses, no usable fingerprints. The DNA recovered at the scene had been preserved, but in 1999, that didn't mean much unless the suspect was already in a criminal database, and whoever had done this had never been caught, or at least never been caught then. Armand closed the file and looked across the room at the newly installed forensic workstation. Things were different now. The world had changed. Technology had caught up with secrets that once stayed buried. "Still thinking about that case?" asked Nadia Karim, the department's forensic analyst, stepping in with a cup of tea in hand. Armand nodded. "She never got a name. That bothers me." Nadia set the cup down and leaned against the desk. "We might be able to change that." Armand looked up. "You mean the new system?" She smiled slightly. "Not just a system, a method, genetic genealogy." He had heard about it. Everyone in law enforcement had. Cases that had gone cold for decades were suddenly cracking open, all because of distant relatives uploading their DNA to online ancestry databases. "You're telling me," Armand said slowly, "we could identify someone not because they're in a criminal database, but because their cousin took a DNA test for fun?" "Exactly," Nadia replied. We don't need a direct match anymore. We just need a family tree. Armand stared at the file again. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a dead end. It felt like a beginning. The process wasn't simple. First, the old DNA sample had to be re-extracted using modern techniques. The original evidence had degraded over time, but advancements in forensic science allowed Nadia's team to recover enough genetic material to build a profile. Then came the upload. Unlike traditional police databases, genetic genealogy relied on public or semi-public platforms where people voluntarily shared their DNA to learn about their ancestry. These databases weren't designed for criminal investigations, but they had become powerful tools in solving them. Within days, the first results came in. Partial matches, Nadia said, scrolling through a list on her screen. No immediate hits, but we've got several second and third cousins. Armand pulled a chair beside her. How many? Enough to build a network, she said, but it's going to take time. Time, Armand thought, was something this case had already consumed too much of. Still, he knew better than to rush this. Genetic genealogy wasn't about quick answers. It was about patience, precision, and a lot of digging. For the next few weeks, Nadia and her small team worked tirelessly. They traced family lines backward through generations, building massive digital trees that spread across countries and decades. Names began to appear, then patterns. "Look at this," Nadia said one evening, pointing at the screen. "All these matches converge on a couple from the 1940s. That's our common ancestor." Armand leaned closer. "So we follow their descendants." Exactly. Somewhere down that line is either our victim or the person who killed her. Meanwhile, Armand reopened the case file. He revisited every detail, the location of the body, the clothing, the few personal items found nearby. Back then, investigators had tried everything: missing persons reports, local interviews, even sketches released to the media. Nothing had worked. But now, with a potential family line, everything looked different. "What if she wasn't from here?" Armand said during one of their late-night sessions. Nadia nodded. "That's likely. If she had local family, someone would have reported her missing. So she traveled or was brought here." Armand tapped the file thoughtfully. "Either way, someone knew her, and now we're getting closer to knowing who that someone is." Weeks turned into a month. The family tree grew larger, branching into hundreds of names. Most of them were irrelevant, but slowly the list began to narrow. Nadia circled a cluster of individuals on her screen. These are the closest matches. They all trace back to the same great-grandparents. Armand studied the names. "What do they have in common?" "Geography," she said. "Most of them are connected to a region about 200 kilometers from where the body was found." That was the first real lead the case had seen in decades. Armand felt a shift, a quiet but undeniable momentum. "Let's focus there," he said. They started contacting individuals from the family tree. Carefully. Not everyone reacted well to being told their DNA might be connected to a decades-old murder case. Some refused to cooperate. Others were curious, even eager to help. One woman, Farzana Ali, proved to be particularly helpful. "I've done a lot of family research," she told them over the phone. "If you're looking for connections, I might have some information." Armand and Nadia drove out to meet her. Farzana welcomed them into a modest home filled with old photographs and neatly organized documents. She spread out a collection of family records on the table. "Our family is quite large," she said, "but there are gaps. People who disappeared, moved away, lost contact." Armand exchanged a glance with Nadia. "Do any of those gaps date back to the late 1990s? Farzana paused, thinking. Then her expression changed. "There was someone," she said quietly, "a distant cousin. Her name was Layla." Armand's pulse quickened. "What happened to her?" "She left home," she said she was going to the city for work. That was the last anyone heard of her." "No missing persons report?" Nadia asked. Farzana shook her head. "Her family wasn't very connected. And back then, people didn't always go to the police. Armand leaned forward. "Do you have a photo?" Farzana hesitated, then stood and walked to a cabinet. She returned with an old album and flipped through its pages until she found a picture. She placed it on the table. Armand looked down. The image was faded, but the face was clear enough. For a moment, the room was silent. Nadia spoke first. "This could be her." Armand nodded slowly. "We need to confirm it." Back at the lab, they compared the photo with the forensic reconstruction of the unidentified victim. The similarities were striking. Same facial structure, same age range. But they needed more than visual confirmation. "We'll need DNA from a direct relative," Nadia said, "to be sure." Farzana agreed to help. She provided a sample which was quickly processed. The wait felt longer than it was. When the results finally came in, Nadia didn't say anything at first. She just turned the screen toward Armand. The match was clear. After 27 years, the unidentified victim had a name: Layla. Armand sat back, absorbing it. "She wasn't just a case," he said quietly. "She was a person, someone who mattered." Nadia nodded. "And now we know." But the relief was short-lived, because identifying the victim was only half the story. The other half was still out there. Whoever had taken Layla's life had walked free for nearly 3 decades, and now, thanks to the same DNA that gave her back her name, they were about to start looking for him. The room felt smaller after they learned her name. For years, the case had been an abstraction, a file, a set of evidence markers, a faceless victim. But now Layla was real, and that changed everything. Detective Armin Rahman pinned her photograph to the center of the board. Around it, he began placing everything they had gathered so far: old crime scene photos, maps, timelines, and now a growing family tree that stretched across generations. "We start from the moment she left home," Armin said. "We rebuild her last known movements." Nadia nodded, pulling up her notes. Farzana said Layla left for the city in early 1999. No confirmed job, no confirmed contacts, which means she trusted someone, or someone made her trust them. They went back to the town where Layla had grown up. It was the kind of place where people remembered faces more than dates. Narrow roads, small houses, and neighbors who noticed when something felt off. An elderly shopkeeper recognized her immediately. "Layla," he said, squinting at the photo. "Yes, she used to come here with her aunt. Quiet girl, kept to herself." "Do you remember when she left?" Armin asked. The man nodded slowly. "There was talk. She had found work, or someone had found it for her." "Someone?" asked Nadia. The man hesitated. "A man used to visit, not from here. Drove a dark car, didn't speak much." Armin leaned in. "Did anyone know his name?" The shopkeeper shook his head. "No, but people noticed. He didn't belong." That was the first real shadow in Layla's story. Back at the station, Armin circled the timeline. "Unknown male," he said, "connected to Layla shortly before she disappeared. That's our starting point." Nadia was already thinking ahead. If he's connected to her, there's a chance his DNA is what we recovered at the scene. Armin looked at her. "Which means," she said, "we run the same process, but this time we're not looking for the victim's family. We're building the suspect's family tree." This time, the stakes felt heavier. They uploaded the second DNA profile, the one taken from evidence at the scene. It had always been there, waiting. In 1999, it had been useless. Now it was a key. The results came back faster than before. "Matches," Nadia said. "Stronger ones." Armin pulled his chair closer. "How close?" She replied, "First and second cousins. This is good, very good." It meant the suspect wasn't just a distant genetic ghost. He had relatives in the database, real people, traceable people, and through them, they could find him. The process repeated, but this time it felt sharper, more focused. Names appeared on the screen, dozens at first, then hundreds. Nadia and her team began mapping them, connecting branches, eliminating lines that didn't fit the geography or timeline. Armin focused on behavior. "We're looking for a man," he said, pacing slowly. "Late 20s to 40s in 1999, likely had access to a vehicle, possibly moved between regions. Someone who could approach a young woman without raising suspicion," Nadia added. "Exactly." They worked late into the night, cross-referencing names with public records, employment histories, and old addresses. Then a pattern emerged. "There's a cluster here," Nadia said, zooming into a section of the family tree. "Most of these matches trace back to a family that lived near the region where Layla disappeared." Armin studied the names. "How many males in the right range?" Nadia said, "7, but we can narrow it down." They started eliminating. One had been living abroad at the time, another was too young, a third had a solid alibi, backed by records and witnesses. That left 4. Armin wrote their names on the board. 4 men, 4 possible lives. One of them had crossed paths with Layla in 1999. The next step was surveillance and background checks. Quiet, careful. They couldn't just accuse someone based on genetic probability. They needed confirmation, solid evidence. The first man was a dead end. No criminal history, stable life, no connection to the region where the body was found. The second had a minor record, but nothing violent. His timeline didn't match. The third raised some flags: frequent travel, unstable employment, but no direct link to Layla. Then there was the fourth, Rashid Karim. He had lived less than 50 kilometers from Layla's hometown in 1999. He owned a dark-colored vehicle back then. Records showed he had worked temporary jobs that required travel between towns. And then there was something else. He disappeared for a few weeks in mid-1999. No records, no explanation. Armin felt it immediately. "This is him," he said quietly. "Or at least this is our best lead." They needed DNA to confirm it, but getting it wasn't straightforward. Rashid Karim was now in his late 50s, living a quiet life. No major criminal record, no reason for the police to approach him directly without raising suspicion. "To collect it indirectly?" Nadia suggested. Armin nodded. "Trash retrieval?" "Exactly." It was legal. If someone discarded something in a public space, it could be collected and tested. So they waited. 2 days later, they got their chance. A discarded cup, a used tissue. Enough. Back in the lab, Nadia processed the sample. Armin didn't leave. He stood by the window, watching the city move as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had. "Results are coming," Nadia said. He turned. The room went quiet. She looked at the screen, then at him. "It's a match." For a moment, neither of them spoke. After nearly 30 decades, the man who had taken Layla's life had a name: Rashid Karim. Not a ghost, not a theory, a real person. Armin exhaled slowly. "We bring him in." The arrest was quiet. No media, no spectacle. Rashid opened the door himself when they knocked. He looked older, smaller somehow than Armin had imagined. "Rashid Karim?" asked Armin. "Yes?" "We need you to come with us." There was a flicker of confusion, then something else. Recognition. In the interrogation room, Rashid sat still, hands folded. "We have your DNA," Armin said calmly. "It matches evidence from a 1999 case." Rashid didn't respond. "We know about Layla," Armin continued. "We know you met her. We know you took her out of that town." Silence stretched. Then Rashid spoke, barely above a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would ever find out." Armin leaned forward slightly. "Tell us what happened." Rashid closed his eyes. For years, the truth had been buried. Now it was starting to surface. Rashid Karim kept his eyes closed for a long time. The interrogation room was quiet except for the faint hum of the overhead light. Detective Arman Rahman didn't interrupt. He had learned that in moments like this, silence could be more powerful than any question. When Rashid finally spoke, his voice was thin, almost detached. "I remember her," he said. "She trusted me." Armand stayed still. "How did you meet her?" Rashid swallowed. "I used to pass through her town for work, small jobs, deliveries. I saw her a few times, near the market. She was always alone." Nadia, seated behind the glass in the observation room, watched closely as every word was recorded. "You approached her?" Armand said. Rashid nodded faintly. "I told her I could help her find work in the city. She wanted to leave, said there was nothing for her there." That part matched what they already knew. Hope had been the hook. "What happened after she got into your car?" Armand asked. Rashid's hands tightened slightly. "We drove for a while. She kept asking questions about the job, about where we were going." "And?" Armand pressed gently. "I didn't have answers," Rashid admitted. "I hadn't planned that far." That was the first crack in the image Armand had been building. This wasn't a mastermind. This was something else, something more chaotic, more impulsive. What changed? Armand opened his eyes now, staring at the table. She realized something was wrong. She started panicking, tried to get out of the car. The room felt heavier. "I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop." Armand didn't need the details. He could see where it was going. Rashid's voice dropped even lower. "It got out of control." The confession unfolded in fragments, not dramatic, not theatrical, just pieces of memory stitched together after years of silence. Rashid admitted he had taken Lila to a remote area. What happened there he described in vague, evasive terms, but it was enough. The intent, the violence, the final act that ended her life. "I left her there. I thought no one would find her." But someone had. And even when the case went cold, the evidence had waited. "Why didn't you come forward?" Armand asked. Rashid gave a hollow laugh. "Would you?" Armand didn't respond. Rashid continued. "At first I was scared. Then time passed. I got married, had a family. I convinced myself it was over." He looked up for the first time, meeting Armand's eyes. "I buried it." Armand held his gaze. "You buried her, but you didn't bury what you did." The formal charges came quickly after the confession. Forensic evidence, DNA confirmation, timeline reconstruction, witness statements from the town. The case that had once been nothing more than a forgotten file was now solid, complete. Rashid Karim was charged with the murder of Lila. The trial drew attention, not because of who Rashid was, but because of how he had been found. Genetic genealogy. Experts were called to explain the process, how distant relatives unknowingly had helped build the path that led investigators to him, how a decades-old DNA sample had been transformed into a family map, then into a name. Some called it a breakthrough, others called it unsettling. But for Lila's remaining relatives, there was only one thing that mattered: the truth. Farzana sat quietly in the courtroom during the proceedings. She listened as the evidence was presented, as Rashid's confession was read, as the timeline of Lila's final days was laid out with clinical precision. When the verdict came, she didn't react immediately. Guilty. The word hung in the air. Years of silence finally answered. After the trial, Armand visited the place where Lila had been found. It looked different now. The road was busier, the land around it changed, but the spot itself still held a quiet weight. He stood there for a while, hands in his pockets, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Nadia joined him a few minutes later. It's strange, all this time, and it comes down to a few strands of DNA? Armand nodded. Not just DNA, people. She glanced at him. What do you mean? Every match, he said, every person who uploaded their data. They didn't know it, but they helped build this case. Nadia smiled slightly. A family tree that led to justice. Cases like Lila's weren't unique anymore. Across the world, old investigations were being reopened, evidence boxes pulled from storage, DNA reanalyzed, family trees rebuilt. Names were being found, suspects identified, cold cases were warming up. But not every story ended this way. Some trails still go nowhere. Some DNA samples were too degraded, some family lines too tangled or incomplete. Still, the landscape had changed. Time was no longer the barrier it once was. Back at the station, Armand placed the final report into the file. Case 47B, closed. He paused for a moment before shutting the folder. 27 years. That's how long it took. Not because the truth wasn't there, but because the world hadn't been ready to see it yet. Later that evening, Nadia sent him a message. We've got another one. Armand looked at the screen, then back at the rows of old case files still sitting in storage. Dozens of them, maybe more. Each one a story waiting for a name. He grabbed his jacket. Let's get to work, he said quietly. Somewhere out there, more answers were hidden. Not in witnesses, not in confessions, in bloodlines, in data, in connections no one could see before. And now, for the first time, the past was running out of places to hide.